are you and what are you doing here?
Huh? What was that? So today I want to talk about Auth0. Auth0 is a third-party service that you can plug into your application, which helps you to rapidly implement login and permission functionality in your application. So in other words, if you need people to log into your app,
Who are you and what are you doing here?
and once they're in, if you need to be able to allow or deny them
Is this guy allowed to do this thing?
certain things that they can or can't do in your application,
I don't think you're gonna be able to do that.
then Auth0 is a great way to start because it takes all that programming work out of your hands, puts it in an SDK, and then you just take that SDK, that software development kit, and plug it into your application. But in order to use Auth0, it takes a little bit of understanding. When I first started using Auth0, I plugged it in, but I didn't really understand what I was doing. I needed kind of like a high-level diagram. So I created that high-level diagram that I want you to see. So first, I want to go through a demo application just so we can get some groundwork about what login and permissions are. And then we'll go over to the high-level diagram and we'll talk about the high-level pieces that are involved in using Auth0, or an authentication and authorization service, which means authentication means finding out who someone is or making somebody prove who they are.
Who are you and what are you doing here?
By a login, a password, a username and password. And authorization, which is allowing somebody to do certain things within an app,
Is this guy allowed to do this thing?
or having your app pass things off to your backend, and your backend can decide whether or not they're actually allowed to do those certain things.
I don't think you're gonna be able to do that.
So let's take a look at that demo. Then we'll look at the high-level architecture diagram. We'll see where Auth0 fits in there, and we'll see how the flow all works together by marrying the demo back to the high-level architecture. That way you can get a bird's eye view of how Auth0 works. And you'll also see in that diagram there's a lot more intricate stuff that I'm not going to talk about right now, but I'll talk about in later videos.
Subscribe.
All right, let's take a look at that demo. All right, so here we are over at the demo application. And it's a very simple application that just allows a user to log in and view their profile. So you can see right now I'm logged out because it's got the opportunity for me to log in. Normally you wouldn't display a profile button, view your profile button, unless the person was logged in, but this is just for example purposes. Same with this protected data. This is, if I click this button, the application is going to try and reach directly to the API and get some data. And so you can see I'm not logged in. So if I click that, you'll see down here there was some action that went on. And basically it's saying it checked to see if you were authorized, and the app said, no, you're not authorized. You got to authorize before you can, you got to get logged in before you can go and get some data. That's actually the SDK doing some of that work for me, the SDK from Auth0. Now you'll also see that if I try to view the profile page, so if somebody just types /profile, they won't be able to get to the profile. So that's the same as me clicking this button. And if you look at the lower left corner here, you can see that it says /profile. So I'll click that, and since I'm not logged in, it's going to redirect me to a login page. Now you can see I'm over on Auth0 now. So we'll talk about this when we get into the architecture diagram. This is where Auth0's SDK that I'm plugging into my application is doing a bunch of work for me. I don't have to create this sign-up form or handle all the issues that come along with signing up, sending out emails and verifying email addresses if you want to do that type of stuff. Two-party, two-factor authentication, the login form. You can see also that I can sign in or sign up with Google. So if I click on that, I am going to be taken over to Google, and this is Auth0 handling this programming to interface with Google, so I don't have to do any of this. And we'll talk about that layer as well. So now I'm going to choose to just log in with my username and password that I used before, that I've signed up with before. So I'll click login, and you'll see I was taken back to the application, and now I'm back to localhost, or if this was my domain, it would be mydomain.com. And so now I'm able to view the profile page. So now that I'm logged in, I'm able to get some information about the user and display it, or the front end is allowed to get information about the user and display it. This information happens to be located inside of a token. We'll talk about what tokens are and the different types of tokens, but that information is contained in the token so that the application can consume it or use it. Now, if I go back to the home page before where I clicked to get the protected data, and we saw that there was an issue, now we'll see that it's actually going to reach out to this API/external link. Now, there's two of them here because one of them's a pre-flight check that's part of CSRF cross-scripting stuff. But the other one's the actual call that returns the data. So we see that the data was returned in the response. Your token was successfully validated. So my application was able to reach out directly to the API server and get something back. And that's just something I programmed on the back end, was to say, you know, I've validated your token. I can now get data. Okay, great. So now we've done the demo. Let's take a look at the high-level architecture diagram, and we'll see all the different pieces, including Auth0, and we'll look back and forth between the demo and the architecture diagram and see how the Auth0 fits in the grand scheme of things. Okay, so here we are over at the high-level architecture diagram, and I just want you to pay attention to the big blocks right now. There's a lot of detail here, but really just focus on the fact that there's big blocks, and we're going to talk about the names of each of those blocks in the large bold letters here. So we've got the application, the front-end application, we've got the back-end API, we've got Auth0, and Auth0 is going to work with the providers behind it, which Auth0 calls connections. So let's start with the application. In my case, I'm running Vue.js. This page here, this code, JavaScript and HTML running in the browser, that is a Vue.js application. And you could also use React or Angular or pure vanilla JavaScript, or you could even use native front ends like iOS code or Android code, you know, or common codes that work together between those two, like Flutter, that type of stuff. But for this case, we're talking about Vue, so I'm talking about a web browser. So my application is going to need to authenticate the person or log the person in when it tries to get information about the user or get some data that the user would want to retrieve. So the application, when it recognizes that, and you'll write that code using Auth0's software development kit, their SDK, which makes it easy to interface with their service. You'll just write a few lines of code that'll send the user over to Auth0, and then Auth0 will handle either getting them signed up or getting them logged in. So let's take a look at that. That's me clicking. When you click on profile, now I'm not logged in, so when I click profile, my app is going to redirect over to Auth0, and Auth0 now does all this forms and stuff to get the user signed up or logged in. Now there's a reason we're over on auth0.com. That's actually a reason for cookies and universal sign-in and stuff. We'll get into that later and when we get deeper into the architecture. But for now, we're just sending the user over to Auth0. So this is where Auth0 kind of fits in. Now, if we decide to sign in with Google, Auth0 is going to handle that for us and work with Google to get the user authenticated through Google. So clicking on here and taking us over to Google, Auth0 is handling this and doing this for us. So it's abstracting our application from what it calls the connections, and so that we don't have to include extra programming for that. So if I wanted to include Google and Facebook logins in my application, I might have to program, an interface to allow the Google login or the Facebook login, because they're not necessarily using standard code right now, standard interfaces. So Auth0 abstracts that from us. We only program to Auth0, and then Auth0 does that extra work for us and ultimately sends us back to our application. So after I'm signed in, so now I'm going to click to log in, and that's going to take me back to my application, and now I am authenticated. So you can see it took me to my profile page, and it's telling me I can log out and I've got some information. So that's Auth0 doing all the work to log us in and then sending us back to the application. Now it sent us back to the application with two tokens, and typically it's programmed to come back with one, but you can program it to say come back with a second token. This token has the claims like the name, the picture, and the email. So the ID token is what has this information here, my nickname, my picture. So this is just the raw data, but this is me taking this this picture and displaying it up here in HTML and displaying the email address that comes from here within the token. So that's the ID token. We'll get deep into that at some point. So Auth0, so we sign in, we need sign in, we sent over to Auth0. Auth0 takes care of getting the person logged in and sends us back a piece of information that proves they're logged in. Now this token, again, we'll get into it later, but it proves that the user has been logged in. It is not encrypted, but it is signed, which means it can't be changed, so we can believe what it says. The other piece that it can come back with, which we can program it to do, is the access token. Now that access token is what is going to be used when our application needs to talk to our backend API and get information. So if it was a Facebook type application that had news feeds or news stories, and you wanted to display those news feed stories to the user, you would send this access token back to the API. The API would validate that token, and then if it validates, would send back the stories that you're trying to request. So if we look at our application here and we go back to the home page, that's me pressing this button. Within pressing this button, an API call is being made over to the API server. So this call /HPI external, which you can see right there next to my mouse, that is the address of my API server. And so my API server, I'm actually sending it, if you take a look in the headers, I'm sending this authorization bearer thing and then this long piece of data, which is base 64 encoding of this token here. So the application, when it needs to get data about the user or data that the user has access to, will send the token, the API will verify it, and that API will then send back the data. So in this case, I'm not actually retrieving any data. My backend API is just saying, yes, I've received your token, I've validated it, and I'm sending back this message that tells you that I've validated it. Now real quick, before we depart, I do need to mention that in this diagram here, I want to make sure you realize that the application and the API are running on your servers. This is code that you write and servers that you have to run, or you might run managed servers or put your application somewhere on a service that's running it, but it's not part of Auth0. So these two things are things that you write and have to run somewhere. When you bring the person over to Auth0, Auth0 has its own servers that's running all that login code and stuff. Now you can't actually, when we get down into it and start talking about rules and hooks, you can write code that runs on this server to help do certain things that you might need. But for the most part, you don't have to worry about this server running. You need to worry about writing your code and your server running in these two instances here. All right, so there it is. There you have it. That is Auth0. That is a high-level architecture diagram that shows you how Auth0 would fit into your application. So hopefully if you didn't see that before in your head, you can now see it because it's on paper. Coming up in future videos, I hope to get into more of the intricacies in that diagram that you might have seen that I didn't get into this video. I'm going to talk about how some of those little pieces relate to the actual Auth0 interface, as well as getting into some code. That was my dog back there. So stick around, hit subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you'll see my dog in the next video. See you then. Oh, you're still here. I'm sorry. This video's over. But if you hit that subscribe button, I mean really, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Then YouTube will let you know when another video comes out. And if you can find it, ring that bell. Then YouTube will definitely let you know when the next video comes out. Okay, take care of those things. And if you're a freelance developer, head on down to dedicatedmanagers.com and tell us about yourself. If you're looking for support on a project, head on down to dedicatedmanagers.com and tell us about yourself. Let us know what you need and we'll help you find some solutions. All right, thanks for playing along. We'll see you in the next video.